The day my husband promoted his secretary Mistress, I was sitting at the far end of the boardroom table, watching him pretend the whole thing was a business decision. Daniel stood near the screen in the navy suit I had bought him for our 10th wedding anniversary. He looked confident, almost relaxed, the way he always looked when he believed everyone in the room belonged to him. The board members were seated around the long, polished table. Coffee cups, leather folders, tablets, quiet smiles. Everything looked professional on the surface. But nothing about that morning was professional. Ava Monroe was sitting in my old chair. She had crossed her legs neatly under the table, one hand resting near a folder she had no right to touch. She wore a cream blazer, pearl earrings, and the kind of quiet smile that only another woman can fully understand. It was not polite. It was not nervous. It was victorious. Daniel cleared his throat and looked around the room. "Starting today," he said, "Ava Monroe will join our executive leadership team as Vice President of Strategic Operations." A few people clapped. Some clapped because they were surprised. Some clapped because they were uncomfortable. Margaret Calloway, the chair of the board, did not clap at all. I noticed that. I noticed everything. Daniel kept speaking, his voice smooth and rehearsed. He said Ava represented the future of the company. He said the company needed fresh leadership, sharper instincts, and people who understood business instead of emotions. Then he looked directly at me. That was the part he enjoyed. He wanted me to react. He wanted tears, anger, embarrassment, anything he could later call instability. But I did not give him that. I simply rested my hands over the black folder in my lap. Because Daniel did not know what was inside it. The apartment invoices, the hotel receipts, the corporate card statements, the jewelry purchase, the forged board approval, the private emails, the signatures. Every document he thought I would never find. For months, he believed my silence meant I was weak. He never considered the possibility that my silence meant I was organized. Then the boardroom door opened, and Martin Hale, the external auditor, stepped inside. Daniel frowned. Ava's smile faded. Martin did not raise his voice. He did not make an accusation. He simply opened his folder, looked at my husband, and asked one question. "Who approved the apartment payments under company expenses?" That was the moment Daniel finally understood. I had not come to that meeting for closure. I had come with proof. Before there was a boardroom, before there was a glass tower, before Daniel's name appeared in business magazines, there was a rented office above a coffee shop on Madison Street. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The heating barely worked in winter. We had 2 second-hand desks, one printer that jammed every morning, and a laptop with a cracked corner that Daniel insisted still had at least one more year in it. Back then, he called the company Our Miracle. He had the vision. I will give him that. Daniel could walk into a room with nothing but a nervous smile and leave with a handshake, a meeting, or at least someone willing to hear him out. He made people feel like they were getting in early on something important. But I was the one who made the miracle function. I built the first budget. I drafted the first service agreements. I negotiated the first vendor contracts. I tracked every invoice in spreadsheets so detailed that our accountant once joked I could find a missing dollar faster than most people found their car keys. When Daniel overpromised to clients, I stayed up late finding a way to deliver. When he forgot follow-up calls, I made them. When our first major contract almost fell apart because of a delivery issue, I drove across town in the rain with revised documents in my passenger seat and saved the relationship myself. The first bank refused to lend to Daniel alone. He was too ambitious, they said, with too little collateral. So I signed the personal guarantee with him. That night, Daniel cried on the kitchen floor of our tiny apartment. I remember it because he was still wearing his dress shirt from the bank meeting, but his sleeves were rolled up and his tie was lying somewhere near the refrigerator. He held my hand and said, "Claire, if this works, it will be because of you." I believed him. For years, he said it too. He told clients I was the reason the company did not collapse in its first year. He told employees I was the person who understood the business from the inside out. At small dinners, before the expensive restaurants and polished speeches, he used to put his arm around my shoulders and say, "I'm the face. Claire is the foundation." I did not need the spotlight then. I had something better. I had trust. That was what made the change so painful. It did not happen all at once. If Daniel had woken up one morning and become cruel overnight, maybe I would have seen it clearly. Maybe I would have left sooner. But people rarely erase you with one dramatic gesture. They do it in edits. First, Daniel stopped mentioning me in interviews. Then he started saying I had helped in the early days, as if I were part of the origin story, but not the present. Later, at events, he introduced me as his wife instead of his co-founder. The first time he did it, I assumed it was accidental. The second time, I corrected him gently afterward. The third time, he looked annoyed. "Do we really need to make every room about titles?" he asked me. I remember standing in our walk-in closet that night, still wearing my heels, staring at him as he took off his cufflinks. I wanted to say that it was not about titles. It was about truth, but I swallowed the words, because that is what I had learned to do by then. I swallowed small hurts to keep the peace. Then Ava Monroe arrived. She came recommended by one of our investors as an executive assistant. Her resume was perfect, and her interview was better. She was polished, organized, confident, and careful with her words. She had the kind of calm that made people assume competence. At first, I liked her. That is something people do not understand. The woman your husband betrays you with does not always arrive wearing warning signs. Sometimes she arrives with a neat ponytail, a clean resume, and the ability to remember everyone's coffee order. Ava was useful. I never denied that. She anticipated Daniel's schedule, handled travel changes, prepared client folders, and cleaned up his calendar with impressive efficiency. Daniel started praising her quickly. Ava handled it. Ava knows what I need. Ava gets pressure. Ava thinks like an executive. The first few times, I nodded. Then I started noticing how often he said her name when no one had asked about her. One afternoon, we were having lunch in his office. I had brought up a delayed client report that needed his attention. Daniel was barely listening. He was typing on his phone, smiling at something that clearly was not related to the report. When I asked what was so funny, he put the phone face down. "Ava has instincts," he said. I looked at him. Instincts for what? His expression changed. It was small, but I saw it. His mouth smiled, but his eyes hardened. "For business, Claire." That was the first time he said my name like it was an interruption. The first real proof of something inappropriate came from a trip to Dallas. Daniel told me Ava needed to travel with him because the schedule was complicated. There were client meetings, an investor lunch, and a dinner. He said required someone to coordinate materials. It sounded reasonable. That was the dangerous part. A lot of betrayal sounds reasonable at first. I checked the travel folder because travel expenses had been my responsibility since the company was young. There were 2 rooms booked at the same hotel, same floor, same executive suite category, both listed under client accommodations. No client was staying there. I remember staring at that screen for a long time, waiting for my mind to offer me an innocent explanation. Maybe the hotel upgraded them, maybe a client canceled, maybe the file was mislabeled. But deep down, I already knew. Still, I did not confront Daniel that night. I did not ask why he had booked 2 suites. I did not search his phone. I did not scream. That was the first rule I learned. Never confront a liar before you know how much of the truth you can prove. After Dallas, things became harder to ignore. Daniel came home later, then later than that. He started taking calls in the garage. His phone stayed face down on the nightstand. He changed his passcode and acted offended when I noticed. At the office, Ava became more comfortable. Too comfortable. She walked into Daniel's office without knocking. She answered questions directed to him. She corrected staff in a tone that did not match her title. She began calling him Daniel in a way that sounded intimate, not professional. One day I passed his office and heard her laughing. Not polite laughter, private laughter. The door was half open. Ava was leaning against Daniel's desk, and he was standing too close to her. When they saw me, she stepped back. Daniel did not. That told me more than any confession could have. He said, "Claire, we were discussing the Denver proposal." Ava smiled and added, "Daniel was just explaining how some people have trouble letting go of old systems." Some people. She meant me. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to correct her. He said nothing. That was the day I stopped asking myself whether something was happening and started asking what I could prove. The affair hurt. Of course it did. I had loved Daniel for 15 years. I had slept beside him, built with him, defended him, and believed in him when the people he now tried to impress would not return his calls. But the affair was not the worst part. The worst part was what he did with it. He began turning betrayal into company policy. First, he suggested I work from home more often. He said the office was becoming crowded. Then he said employees were confused by my role. Then he said investors preferred a cleaner leadership structure. Cleaner. That was the word he used for removing me. A month later, my name disappeared from the company website. No announcement, no conversation, no courtesy. I found out on a Tuesday morning while drinking coffee at my kitchen counter. I opened the leadership page and scrolled. Daniel was there. The CFO was there. The operations director was there. Even Ava was there, listed as executive strategy coordinator. I was gone. When I asked Daniel about it, he barely looked up from his laptop. "It is just branding," he said. Branding. 15 years of work had become a branding issue. Then came my office. I had chosen that room myself when we moved into the building. It had corner windows, morning light, and shelves full of old files nobody respected until they needed them. It was not just an office to me. It was the one physical place in that company that still remembered who I had been. One Friday, Daniel told me the room was being temporarily reassigned to Ava for a restructuring project. Temporary, he said. On Monday, there was a new nameplate on the door, Ava Monroe, Executive Strategy Office. I stood in the hallway holding my handbag, looking at the nameplate, feeling something inside me go very still. Ava opened the door from inside. She was holding one of my old file boxes. "Oh," she said, smiling. "I was wondering when someone would pick these up." She placed the box in my arms like she was returning something I had left behind at her house. Then she lowered her voice. Daniel thought the room should be used by someone active in the company. There are moments when anger comes so fast, it almost makes you dizzy. That was one of them. But I did not drop the box. I did not slap her. I did not call Daniel. I looked at her wrist. She was wearing a gold watch I had seen before. Not on her, in the expense system. $7,800, listed as a VIP client gift. Now I knew who the VIP client was. I carried the box to my car, placed it on the passenger seat, and sat there for several minutes without moving. Then I opened my laptop and created a folder. I named it Receipts. The first real receipt was the apartment. I still had access to the expense system because I had helped build the approval structure years earlier. Daniel never bothered to remove me completely. He thought I would not look. He thought I was too emotional, too humiliated, too busy trying to save a marriage that he had already turned into a performance. The charge was listed as executive housing, $8,450 per month. River North. Luxury furnished apartment. Occupant, Ava Monroe. The approval came from Daniel. The business purpose said, client-facing executive transition. I read that phrase 5 times. That was what my husband called paying rent for his mistress. A client-facing executive transition. I downloaded the invoice. Then I saved the approval record, exported the payment history, and backed everything up in 2 separate places. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I did not confront him. I archived it. After that, the receipts came faster. A weekend hotel stay in Miami, marked as a regional partner meeting. No partner attended. A private dinner for 2, marked as investor relations. No investor was invited. Jewelry, marked as client appreciation. Ava wore it to work the following Monday. A second corporate card issued without proper authorization. A bonus payment outside the normal compensation cycle. A draft memo proposing Ava's promotion before the board had ever discussed it. Every lie had a number. Every number had a date. Every date had a signature. And most of the signatures belonged to Daniel. The hardest receipt was not financial. It was an email. Daniel sent it to Ava at 1:17 in the morning. The subject line was simple. Next steps. In the email, he wrote, Claire is still emotionally attached to the old structure. Once the board sees you in the VP role, they will adjust. She has no real power anymore. I stared at that sentence until the screen blurred. She has no real power anymore. Not my wife is hurt. Not Claire built this with me. Not even this will be difficult. Just that. She has no real power anymore. For a few minutes, I let myself feel it. The grief, the insult, the coldness of realizing that the man I had protected was not just betraying me. He was preparing to erase me completely. Then I saved the email. Because pain is not useful until it becomes proof. The final humiliation before the board meeting happened at an investor dinner. Daniel told me not to come. He said it would be better if leadership presented a unified direction. But Margaret Calloway asked for me personally, and Daniel could not refuse Margaret. She was the chair of our board, the first serious investor who had believed in the company when it was still fragile. Margaret was elegant in a severe way, with silver hair, sharp eyes, and the ability to make arrogant men sit straighter just by looking at them. At the dinner, Ava sat beside Daniel. I sat across from them. That was not an accident. Ava wore a deep red dress and diamond earrings. I recognized the earrings immediately. Corporate expense, client appreciation. During the meal, one of the investors asked me about the company's original operating model. I began to answer, but Daniel interrupted before I finished my first sentence. Claire helped when things were smaller, he said, smiling as if he were being kind. But Ava has been leading the serious operational strategy lately. Ava lowered her eyes for a moment, pretending modesty. Daniel is being generous, she said. I just brought structure where there was sentiment. Sentiment. That word landed harder than I expected. Years of unpaid nights, loans, contracts, risk, budgets, employees, sacrifice. She called it sentiment. Daniel laughed. A few people laughed with him because wealthy rooms often confuse cruelty with confidence. Margaret did not laugh. I picked up my water glass, took one sip, and said nothing. On the ride home, Daniel was angry, not at Ava, at me. You embarrassed yourself tonight, he said, trying to sound relevant. I looked out the window while the city lights moved across the glass. He kept going. Ava is useful. You need to accept that. I turned to him and asked, useful to the company or useful to you? His jaw tightened. Careful, Claire. You do not want to start a fight you cannot win. That was when I almost smiled, because Daniel did not know the fight had already started. And he was already losing. The next morning, I called Evelyn Hart. Evelyn was not my divorce lawyer. Not yet. She was a corporate attorney who had reviewed our original shareholder agreements years earlier. Daniel barely remembered her, which made her even more useful. Her office was quiet, expensive, and almost painfully organized. I placed a printed stack of documents on her desk and watched her face as she read. She did not gasp. She did not ask me if I was okay. She did not give me a speech about betrayal. She simply turned page after page. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was paper. Then she looked up and asked, "How much does Daniel know you have?" "Nothing," I said. She leaned back in her chair. "Good, keep it that way." We went through everything. The apartment payments, the jewelry, the hotel stays, the corporate card, the private email, the draft promotion memo. Evelyn separated the personal betrayal from the corporate misconduct with surgical precision. Then she opened the original operating agreement and turned to a clause I had forgotten about. Conflict of interest. Misuse of corporate funds. Undisclosed personal benefit. Executive removal for cause. If these expenses were approved without board authorization, she said, tapping the page, this is not just adultery, it is corporate misconduct. Something settled inside me when she said that. Not relief, not satisfaction, clarity. That was what I had been looking for. A clean line between my broken marriage and the company Daniel was trying to poison with it. Evelyn asked, "Do you want him embarrassed? Or do you want him removed?" I looked at the documents on her desk. "I want the truth documented so well that he removes himself." Evelyn nodded. "Then we need an auditor." Martin Hale entered the story quietly. That was his way. He had been our external auditor for 3 years. Daniel treated him like a formality, a man who checked boxes, asked boring questions, and left. But Martin was not careless. He was not dramatic either. He was worse for Daniel than dramatic. He was thorough. With Evelyn's guidance and Margaret's discreet authorization, Martin began a special review of executive expenses. Officially, it was part of preparation for a financing round. Unofficially, it was the beginning of the end. Daniel did not worry. That made sense. People who believe they control every room rarely check the floor beneath them. Ava even joked about it one afternoon when she did not realize I was in the hallway. "Audits are just paperwork," she said. "Men like Daniel know how to handle paperwork." She was right about one thing. Audits are paperwork. That was exactly why Daniel should have been afraid. Martin started with the corporate cards, then travel, then vendor payments, then board approvals. That was where he found the forged resolution. It claimed the board had approved Ava's executive housing, retention bonus, and future promotion package. Margaret had supposedly signed it. So had 2 other board members. They had not. The digital signature records traced back to an internal workstation. Ava's workstation. Until then, Daniel might have tried to call everything poor judgment. A private affair. a careless classification of expenses, personal weakness. But a forged board approval was different. That was not weakness. That was a scheme. When Martin told me, I did not feel triumph. I felt a cold sadness because part of me still wanted Daniel to have been merely foolish, not fraudulent. Foolish could be mourned. Fraudulent had to be stopped. Martin asked if he should confront Daniel before the next board meeting. I said no. He looked at me carefully. You want him to announce her promotion first? I nodded. That will make the exposure public, he said. I answered, he made the humiliation public. No one argued after that. Daniel scheduled the meeting himself. That was the beautiful part. Nobody pushed him. Nobody trapped him. Nobody forced his hand. He built the stage. He invited the audience. He handed Ava the spotlight. And he never noticed me standing behind the curtain with every receipt. The official topic was leadership restructuring. Daniel sent me the calendar invite himself with only one sentence in the message. You may attend if you want closure. Closure. That was what he called being erased. On the morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. Black blazer, white blouse, no dramatic jewelry, no bright lipstick, no signs of war. I placed the black folder in my bag and looked at myself in the mirror. For a second, I did not recognize the woman looking back. She looked calm, almost cold, but I knew what was underneath. Not rage, not grief, discipline. That is what silence becomes when a woman finally stops begging to be believed. When I arrived, Ava was already in the boardroom. Of course she was. She sat in my old chair like a queen waiting to be crowned. Daniel stood near the screen reviewing slides. When he saw me, he looked almost amused. You came, he said. I was invited, I answered. Ava smiled. I hope this will not be too difficult for you. I looked at her. It will be memorable. She did not understand. Not yet. The board members entered one by one. Margaret sat across from Daniel. Martin waited outside, as planned. Daniel began with numbers, growth projections, market expansion, strategic agility, the kind of language men use when they want betrayal to sound like innovation. Then he moved to leadership. He said the company needed fresh energy, sharper direction, and a modern operational mind. I watched Ava lift her chin. She knew her moment was coming. Daniel clicked to the next slide. Ava's name appeared on the screen. Vice President of Strategic Operations. He said, some people are part of our history. Ava is part of our future. There it was. The line he had probably practiced. The insult dressed as leadership. Ava looked at me again with that same small, private, cruel smile. I opened my folder. Then the door opened. Martin Hale stepped inside. Daniel's expression changed immediately. Not fear. Not yet. Irritation. Men like Daniel are never afraid at first. They are offended that consequences dared to interrupt them. Martin, Daniel said, we were going to bring you in after the announcement. Martin remained standing. The announcement is exactly why I am here. The room changed. Everyone felt it. Ava shifted in my chair. Daniel's hand tightened around the presentation remote. Martin opened his leather folder. Then he asked the question. Who approved the apartment payments under company expenses? No one spoke. For the first time that morning, Ava looked away from me. Daniel forced a laugh. I'm not sure what you mean. Martin placed a document on the table. $8,450 per month. River North furnished apartment. Listed as executive housing. Occupant, Ava Monroe. A board member reached for the document. Margaret did not. She already knew. Daniel straightened his shoulders. That was part of a retention arrangement. Martin asked, approved by whom? Daniel looked at Margaret, then at the other directors, then back at Martin. The board was aware. Margaret spoke for the first time. No, Daniel, the board was not. That was when the first crack appeared. Not in the company. In his face. Martin continued. There are also charges for jewelry, private travel, hotel stays, and a bonus authorization tied to a board resolution that appears not to be valid. Daniel's voice sharpened. This is inappropriate for this meeting. I spoke then, not loudly. I did not need to. No, Daniel, this is the first appropriate meeting we have had in months. The boardroom fell silent again. But this time, the silence did not belong to him. It belonged to me. Daniel tried to do what he always did. He tried to control the story. He said Ava was essential. He said the expenses had strategic purpose. He said the company needed speed. He said I was emotional. That was his mistake. Because I had not brought emotions. I had brought documents. I placed the apartment invoice on the table, then the approval record, then the corporate card statement, then the hotel folio from Miami, then the jewelry receipt, then the forged board resolution. Every page made the room colder. Ava tried to speak. I did not know Daniel was classifying things that way. I looked at her. You signed the housing addendum. Martin placed the copy in front of her. Her signature was there, clear, clean, and unmistakable. Her face went pale. Daniel turned toward the CFO, who was attending by video call. This was processed through finance, he snapped. Ask him. The CFO unmuted himself. His voice shook, but he spoke. I refuse to process the second housing payment without board approval. Mr. Whitmore instructed Ava to route it through executive discretionary expenses. That was the moment the room stopped pretending. Ava stared at the table. Daniel stared at me. You planned this, he said. I held his gaze. No, Daniel, you did. Then I touched the folder. I just kept the receipts. Evelyn joined the meeting by video. Daniel nearly lost control when he saw her. Why is my wife's lawyer in a board meeting? Margaret answered before I could. Because this board needs to understand its exposure. Evelyn explained everything calmly. Conflict of interest, undisclosed personal benefit, misuse of company funds, possible falsification of board approval, potential executive removal for cause. The words did what shouting never could. They made Daniel smaller. Then Evelyn revealed the part Daniel had forgotten. Years earlier, when the company accepted its first major investment, he had signed an executive conduct clause. If he was removed for cause, certain unvested bonus rights and control privileges could be suspended. That included the incentive package he had been trying to create for Ava. Ava was not receiving an empire. She was receiving evidence. Daniel stood up. This is insane, he said. This is my company. Margaret's voice was ice. No, Daniel, it is not. She turned to the board and moved for Daniel's immediate suspension from executive authority pending formal investigation. Someone seconded. The vote was quick. Too quick for Daniel to understand it was really happening. One by one, hands went up. Not his, not Ava's, everyone else. Daniel had been removed from the company he thought belonged to him alone. Ava was suspended immediately. Security came quietly. That was the detail I appreciated most. No shouting, no chaos. Just 2 security officers at the door, waiting with professional patience. Ava stood slowly. For the first time, she did not look polished. She looked young, frightened, and furious that the fantasy had ended before she could enjoy it. As she passed me, she whispered, You ruined my life. I looked at her and said, No, I printed it. She had no answer. After she left, Daniel remained standing. He looked at the board, then at Margaret, then at me. There was hatred in his eyes, but under it there was something else. Shock. He had never truly believed I would fight back. That is the danger of underestimating a quiet woman. You mistake her silence for emptiness, when it may actually be storage. The meeting ended with Daniel suspended, Ava escorted out, and Martin's report officially entered into the board record. The promotion slide was still on the screen. Ava Monroe, Vice President of Strategic Operations. It had been true for less than 30 minutes. That afternoon, a facilities employee removed Ava's nameplate from my old office door. I watched from the hallway as he peeled it off carefully, like it had never belonged there. Inside the office, my old file boxes were still stacked against the wall. Ava had never bothered to unpack them. That made me smile. Not because I wanted the room back, but because she had mistaken possession for ownership. There is a difference. A big one. The days after the meeting were strange. Publicly, the company issued a statement about leadership review and financial controls. Privately, everyone knew. They knew Daniel had used company money for his mistress. They knew Ava had signed documents she should never have touched. They knew I had been right there the whole time. Silent, watching, collecting. Daniel called me 37 times the first night. I did not answer. Then he sent a message. After everything we built, you do this to me? I read it twice and replied with one sentence. All communication through counsel. He hated that. Men like Daniel can survive anger. They can twist tears. They can argue with emotion. What they cannot control is procedure. The divorce followed. Daniel tried to claim I had acted out of jealousy. Evelyn presented the documents. He tried to say the affair was private. Evelyn presented the apartment invoices. He tried to say Ava was a valuable employee. Evelyn presented the forged approval. He tried to say I was unstable. That one almost made me laugh. Because there is nothing unstable about a chronological folder. Receipts do not cry. Bank records do not exaggerate. Hotel invoices do not get jealous. Signatures do not imagine things. That is why I kept them. Not to prove I was hurt, to prove I was right. Ava disappeared from the company within a week. Her apartment lease was terminated. Her corporate card was frozen. Her executive email was locked. The title she had wanted so badly became the first line of an investigation file. As for Daniel, he lost more than a mistress. He lost authority, credibility, control, the illusion that charm could fix anything. For years, Daniel had believed he was the company's story. But stories have records, and the records showed something different. They showed my signatures, my guarantees, my contracts, my notes in the margins, my work. Margaret asked me to return as strategic operations chair during the restructuring. I said yes, but only after one condition. No one would ever introduce me as just Daniel's wife again. Margaret smiled. "Claire," she said, "I do not think anyone will make that mistake twice." Months later, I saw Daniel in the lobby. He looked smaller, not physically. Daniel was still tall, still well-dressed, still carrying himself like a man who remembered being important. But the room no longer bent toward him. People did not rush to impress him. Assistants did not appear with folders. Executives did not laugh too loudly at his jokes. He saw me near the elevator. For a moment, I thought he would keep walking. He did not. "You ruined me," he said. I looked at him, and for a second, I remembered the man on the kitchen floor, the cracked laptop, the coffee shop office. The night he said it would work because of me. I had loved that man. But that man had not survived Daniel's success. So I answered the man standing in front of me. "No, Daniel, I documented you." His face tightened. "Was it worth it?" I thought about the office, the dinners, the lies, the way Ava smiled from my chair, the way he called me history, the way everyone finally saw the truth. Then I said, "You thought my silence meant I had nothing left to say." The elevator doors opened behind me. I stepped inside. Before the doors closed, I looked at him one last time. But silence was where I kept every receipt. The doors closed. And for the first time in years, I did not feel erased, I felt complete. People think revenge is loud. They imagine screaming, throwing things, public scenes, dramatic exits. But the most powerful revenge I ever took made almost no sound. It was a downloaded invoice, a saved email, a copied signature log, a bank transfer, a folder, a question from an auditor, and a room full of people finally hearing the truth. Daniel thought power was being the loudest man at the table. Ava thought victory was sitting in another woman's chair. They were both wrong. Power is knowing the truth before anyone else does. Victory is waiting until the truth has nowhere left to hide. And justice is what happens when a quiet woman keeps the receipts.